Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the May 4th movement. It was this incredible moment of intellectual and political upheaval that, honestly, completely changed the course of modern Chinese history.
What did it mean to be Chinese? Where was the country heading? These weren't just philosophical questions. For a whole generation in early 20th century China, this was everything. It was a massive identity crisis for a nation that felt like it was being left behind by the rest of the world.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to trace the story from this deep national crisis all the way to its lasting, world-changing impact. All right, first up, a nation searching. To really get why 1919 exploded the way it did, we have to look at the pressure that was building up for years. China was in the middle of this profound cultural crisis, just grappling with its place in the modern world.
This whole period became known as the New Cultural Movement. So you might be asking, why suddenly challenge thousands of years of tradition? Well, for these intellectuals, the old, rigid Confucian values were the very reason for China's weakness. They thought it was holding them back, stifling innovation, and to save the country, the old ways just had to go.
And the real engine for all this new thinking? It was the universities, especially Beijing University. You had professors and students publishing these radical journals, pushing for brand new ideologies that questioned pretty much every part of the old society.
Okay, Section 2, the Versailles Betrayal. So we've got this intellectual pot simmering. How does it boil over into a massive national protest? Well, the trigger wasn't some abstract idea. It was a very real, very painful act of international betrayal.
So picture this. World War I is over. China was on the winning side, with the Allies. They went to the Paris Peace Conference feeling pretty hopeful, expecting that, as a matter of basic fairness, the German territories in China would be handed back.
But that's not what happened. Not even close. In what was just a stunning move, the Western powers decided not to return the territory to China. Instead, they just gave Germany's holdings in Shandong province directly to Japan. For the Chinese people, this wasn't just a political defeat, it was a deep national humiliation.
And wow, you can just feel the outrage in this quote. It's from the Student Manifesto on May 4th, 1919, and it perfectly captures that raw emotion. Thousands of people poured into the streets, and just like that, a movement was born.
Moving on to Section 3, a revolution of ideas. Look, this protest was way more than just a patriotic outburst. It was the political flashpoint for an intellectual revolution that had been building for years, and now, suddenly, it had a national stage.
So the key thing to get here is that this was a deep break with the past. But here's a fascinating question. After being so badly betrayed by the Western democracies, why on earth did another Western idea, Marxism, suddenly find an audience? Well, for some, it offered a scientific-sounding reason for why they were being exploited by imperialists, and it gave them a blueprint for a total revolution. That felt a lot more powerful than the slow reforms offered by the very same countries that had just humiliated them.
All right, Section 4, the movement's many faces. This explosion of ideas and politics didn't just stay in the universities. It rippled out and started to transform all of Chinese society and its culture.
The movement really had a few different sides to it. At its heart, politically, was this fierce anti-imperialism, a rejection of foreign control. But what made it so powerful was its social side. The anger brought everyone out, not just students, but merchants and workers too. And all that support helped fuel a real cultural revolution.
And this quote nails one of the biggest changes. Intellectuals started writing in Baiwa, just plain everyday language, instead of the super complex classical Chinese that only the elite could understand. This was a game changer. It made knowledge democratic, making all these new radical ideas accessible to pretty much everyone for the first time.
Okay, our final section, 2 paths for China. Here's the twist. This explosion of new ideas didn't create a single unified plan for China's future. Instead, it created this fundamental split that would basically define the rest of the 20th century.
Yeah, the unity from the protests, it fell apart pretty quickly. Once the immediate outrage over the Versailles Treaty faded, the bigger question came up. Okay, what now? How do we actually use all these new ideas to save China? And they did not agree.
So it basically came down to 2 different paths. On one side, you had guys like Hu Xi, who argued for a more pragmatic, evolutionary approach. Let's just solve problems one by one. But on the other side, you had people drawn to Marxism, who believed that the only way forward was a total radical revolution, to just burn it all down and start over.
And this wasn't just some academic debate.
It had huge political consequences. It was right here, during the May 4th movement, that small groups started to get really serious about studying Marxism. And that led directly to the creation of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921, which set the stage for decades of conflict and shaped the China that we know today.
So in the end, the May 4th movement really shows us how a single moment of political anger, fueled by years of intellectual debate, can just unleash forces that completely reshape a country's identity, its politics, and its future for 100 years. The search for what it meant to be Chinese had started, and it was not going to be simple.